Hello, everybody. Welcome to the stream. I know I'm late. I'm horribly late. I had planned the stream yesterday, couldn't make it. Today I'm late. It's everything. I was supposed to get a delivery this morning. It just came about an hour and a half ago, which it's pretty big, as you can see, and pretty heavy. So that took some time. Every appliances in the kitchen are now broken, and I have to do warranty shit with IKEA. It's a mess. So just so you understand, that's my excuse. That's what's been going on. Other than that, I'm fine. I'm set up to record a podcast. I originally wanted to record an episode. I'm recording The Private Citizen today, in case you weren't aware. I was already originally I was planning to do an episode on the crypto wars, which is what it says in my stream schedule, fab.industry/stream. But I have to. I just finally had time to look into the law that is going to be discussed in the Bundestag tomorrow, which is the new German COVID-19 law. I read through all of it, and it's horrible. It is extremely horrible, so I have to talk about that. I'm going to do that episode about crypto wars as soon as possible, because that is also very important and very dangerous for privacy. So, got a lot on my plate. But let's do this. Let's start. Let's run a little test here, and see if everything is working. If we're doing this, if this is working.
Yeah, it's a great time to be a podcaster. That's all I can say. Very, very proud of.
With your own network to distribute yourself without having to go through Podbean or any of these operations going, we don't think your podcast is suitable anymore.
It is a stupid name. I also like when Dvorak does voices. It's awesome. So, let's have a listen here, see how that goes. Well, that's not how it goes. Can't we just go? Let's turn that off and see if everything is working. If we're doing this, if this is working.
Yeah, it's a great time to be a podcaster. That's all I can say. Very, very proud of.
With your own network to distribute yourself without having to go through Podbean.
I love how
or any of these operations going, we don't think your podcast is suitable anymore.
It is a stupid name. I also like when it's not suitable enough. This podcast definitely isn't suitable. If anybody gets to decide anything, this is not suitable. Which is why it's a podcast. I mean, I know I'm streaming this on Twitch, but I am. I'm awaiting them to pull the plug any minute. Wait, give me a second. I forgot something. Once again.
I forgot the megaphone, and we definitely need the megaphone today.
Yes, this podcast is not suitable, but it will always be there in podcast form. PrivateCitizen.press, as you know. Oh, that reminds me. I forgot something in my setup here. I don't have Twitch chat open, which I'm going to rectify now. Here we are. So, in case you have any comments, please let me know. I will try to incorporate it into the show. Of course, I try to do this. I'm not doing like a. This is not like a normal stream where I, talk to people. Obviously, because it's going to be a podcast and it needs to work for the people that listen to the podcast. I say that every time, but I think it's important. So just be aware of that. But I have an eye on chat, and I will. If something important comes up, I will take your comments. This is what my desk looks like, by the way. This is what it looks like if I do any legislation analysis. Oh, it's crap everywhere. Got handwritten notes. Got notes. So shall we do this? I think we shall. I believe we shall. Right. Do I have everything? I think. Let's see if I can do this intro. Let's start recording first. Let's see if I can do this intro perfectly at the first trial. I think I've never done this on stream. I've done this quite a few times recording offline. It's not happening every time, but let's see if I can do this live too without forgetting something important and having my microphone set up correctly. What's going on today? The wife is here. Thank you. The wife brought me sweets, which is great. Since we can't buy any alcohol today, we have to buy sweets. That's good. I won't be eating those on the show, but those are great, by the way. If you're in Germany, they're like sour apple. They're amazing. Love those things, and obviously love the wife. Got the best wife in the world. Right. I was gonna. Well, that's all wasted recording space here. Speaking of, wait, I have to switch to something else. I need to check if I actually have recording space. And I don't know what this. I don't want to show everybody my hard drive listing. It's not like that there's anything special on there, but it might open on the porn section, and well, I don't really mind, but that's gonna get me in trouble again. So with Twitch probably. So let's not do that. And no, it's all good. We can do this. Let's do the show. Let's try. Let's see if we can make this for take one. Here we go. You are listening to The Private Citizen, defending your right to have something to hide. This is episode 47 for Wednesday, the 11th of November, 2020. The German total lockdown law. Hello everybody, I'm your host, my name is Fab, coming to you live from the locked down city of Düsseldorf, where, I don't know, everything's going on. It's just too much work. I'm drowning in work. And I had actually, originally planned to do an episode on the renewed war on encryption, the new crypto wars that are brewing. It's a very important topic. But then a more important topic came up. So I'm going to do the crypto wars episode. I don't know if I'm going to do 2 this week. I don't want to commit to that because I'm up to my neck in work and other stuff I have to get done. But I'll try. I'll do it next episode, definitely. But I had the, this law's been proposed a week ago, I think. And it's been out in written form a week ago. And but I had just managed to read it, get through it, and do some legislation analysis, as Adam Curry calls it. And it is horrible. So we need to talk about this. Just in case you're wondering, we are talking about the das dritte Gesetz zum Schutz der Bevölkerung bei einer epidemischen Lage von nationaler Tragweite. That's what the law is called. And in Germany, we do not have handy acronyms like Patriot Act. No, it's literally called Drittes Gesetz zum Schutz der Bevölkerung bei einer epidemischen Lage von nationaler Tragweite. Yes, we take this shit seriously. So we're going to talk about that. So it's another... I have to play it, right? It's another COVID topic.
I got myself a case of Wuhan flu. I don't know what I am supposed to do. Didn't know I had it when I gave it to you. Now we all got the Wuhan flu.
Well, I currently don't have it, or I don't think I have it. I did feel a bit under the weather yesterday, so I made myself some chicken soup today. and that helped. Well, actually, I was feeling better this morning, but I bought everything for chicken soup, and you can never have enough chicken soup. So, but we're gonna talk about coronavirus again. I'm sorry, it just has to be that way. There's no way around it. It's just I thought we could just bury this topic for a while, and the world would more or less get back to normal. But this is now it's getting out of hand. So we're going to talk about this law, and then got some feedback. I got a lot of feedback, and I'm going to talk about some of it, about previous episodes. If you want to follow along now, I'm going to talk about the German law here, but I think it's still going to be interesting for other people, because this is going to happen everywhere. These laws are going to crop up everywhere, and it just seems Germany is ahead of the curve. Or maybe we're not, and you have local laws, then please tell me. But if you want to follow along, but it's going to be links, going to be mostly in German. You can go to privatecitizen.press, and then has all the information about the show. It has the show notes, and obviously it has a link to contact me, which is very important. Before I get further into the show, I need a beer today. This shit's so depressing. Seriously, I'm not a person who gets depressed. I don't think I get depressed. I get very angry. I shout at people. I write stuff, and then everything's better. I usually don't get depressed. Yesterday, I was close to getting depressed. I read this law, and my wife came home, and she was like, "What the hell's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "I read this. This is horrible." And it's not like, I study politics. I'm used to horrible laws. It's not like this is the first horrible law or bad idea that we had in Germany, but what depressed me is that I think it will go through, and I think this cannot be stopped. But we'll look at it anyway. Private citizens are press. That's where all the information is, and it's gonna be everything's gonna be on there. Sorry if you don't read German. It's there's no other coverage. I try to link to stuff, to English stuff. I'm going to link to the law, which is obviously in German, but there's no other coverage about this. And I think it's, as I said, I think it's very important for everybody around the world to see what's going on. So what is happening here? Let's get right into the depressing heart of the matter. What's happening here is, I talked in the beginning, I talked about when this thing came up, when I saw the first civil liberty implications, first privacy implications, I talked about this. And I told you about all the measures that we're doing in Germany, and that a lot of the measures, or pretty much all of them, were policy implementations. They weren't laws. They weren't actual laws. They weren't putting laws on the book. At first they were like, oh, this is probably going to blow over. Let's just do... They were doing things in what they thought the framework of the actual law was. So the Infektionsschutzgesetz, which I talked about on the show, which is the infection protection law in Germany, which is that that has all these things in there that concern a situation that we have right now. But it doesn't have all these. It doesn't have masks in there. It doesn't have social distancing. Nothing of that was in there. So they just implemented it, and they said, well, this is all going to be policy. Now, what's happening now is what was bound to happen. They're going to put this in law, and so the reigning coalition in the Bundestag, which is the Conservatives and the Labour Party, CDU, CSU, which is the union of the conservative parties. One's from Bavaria, the rest is from the rest of Germany. And the SPD, which is the Labour Party, SPD, they have drafted this law. And this is 17 pages. It's mostly changes to the Infektionsschutzgesetz. But these changes are... tough, and it starts, like every law, they go like, what do we want to do? And obviously, COVID is horrible, and we're gonna die. So they start out with that, and then it becomes hilarious pretty quickly. Although it's not so much hilarious, it's more in a British, a black humor kind of sense, hilarious, because it's actually quite horrible. So the third point in this law, usually they have this law, and then they say, okay, we want to draft it, we're proposing this law because we want to solve a situation, and then usually they put alternatives in. Well, not always, but so under alternatives, it just says nothing. full stop. It literally says alternatives, nothing, full stop. And when I read this, I put next to it lol, because there's this joke, and there's a podcast in Germany called Alternativlos, where these guys, then one of them is like a programmer, but it doesn't matter. They were analyzing politics, and they realized that there is this tendency to call everything in German politician, especially Angela Merkel, calls everything alternativlos. Alternativlos means there's no alternative. We can only do this because there's no alternative to this. And this is how they see this law. And if I'm going to start telling you what's in there and what happens, and the fact that they think that has no alternative is quite, I would say, extremely worrying to me. Okay, so they want to change the Infektionsschutzgesetz. So just quickly, let's go through the points that are in this law. So they propose to have to collect patient data. I mean, I've told you on previous shows how in Germany special meldepflichtige Krankheiten, we call them special diseases, have to be reported. They have mandatory reporting rules, and that's being done with SARS-CoV-2 infections. That's happening. So that's happening already. They're being reported centrally to the Robert Koch Institute, the RKI. They're called an institute, but they are a government facility. They're like the CDC. They're a government agency. And they're collecting all this data, but they want to collect a lot more data, and it's going to be all central and all held within the RKI. They are going to implement travel restrictions, both for people traveling into Germany as also for people traveling inside of Germany. They're going to bring in something that I call I call it the plague passport. But we talked about this. I talked about it in episode 38. Immunity passports, and why I saw that coming. It was clear that they were going to do this, and why I thought this was a bad idea. Both obviously from a civil liberties perspective, but also from a privacy perspective. I always get these questions. People ask me, why do you talk about coronavirus and COVID so much? And it's just, all of this has privacy implications. Because what they are doing, I mean, this is not people think this is a conspiracy theory, but it's not. It clearly isn't. All our governments are doing to combat this pandemic is control. They're control measures. You should do certain things or you can't do certain things. And without going into if that's okay, if it's justified, I talked about this on the show a lot, that I think some of these things are justified. The problem is that with control today, that with a control mechanism, there's always a privacy implication these days, because it's always data that needs to be collected to enforce this control. I'm just seeing, obviously I'm streaming these things live on Twitch, and my camera's just spazzing out. If you're listening to this on the podcast, that doesn't mean anything to you. Although on Wednesday evenings, if you ever wanted me to record one of these and see me while I do it, you can do that. And if you heard that, the neighbors are drilling again. But I will fight back, because today I got a kickboxing sack delivered, sparring, a boxing thing. And I'll tomorrow, or probably the day after, I will have to put in some serious bolts in the ceiling, which is concrete, and that's going to be loud. So I'm going to fight back. Anyway, where was I? So they're going to implement immunity passports. They're going to do that. It's not specifically in this law, but it's clear. I will explain. What else are they doing? So basically, this law prepares what I maybe would call maximum lockdown. That's what it looks like. So there is physical distancing measures are in here, mask wearing, shutdown of whole industries like tourism, Wow, they're putting some heavy duty screws in the wall as well. It sounds like, I don't know if you can hear that. Sometimes I say that and then you can't really hear it on the podcast because I managed to fix it in post, but I don't know. I just thought it's distracting me, and so you know what's going on. Anyway, so restrictions for industries like tourism, for just, you know, generally shops and businesses, and then there's stuff, religion, that's restricted. What's in here is actually the prohibition of alcohol sales, which is new. Actually, that's the thing I can probably, let me finish this and then I talk a bit about that. Then, of course, closure of restaurants and the just forbidding events. What they're also putting in here is forcing you to take a test, which is interesting and is, in my view, unconstitutional, but I'm going to talk about that. And then also the prohibition of, you know, basically social gatherings or, you know, contacts to other people, which, you know, we've had in public places, and that's not so much the issue. The issue here is clearly that they're going in, that this law applies, and they explicitly say so, to personal spaces, which means they'll have to control those, which means they will have to have the ability to actually check if there are other people in your house, which is something the German Constitution explicitly forbids. Now, of course, there's always the argument, you know, is this constitutional? Obviously, the Constitution says you can't do these things, but there's always leeway, right? It's always a question of is this justified in an emergency situation? Which, you know, it can be, but that's going to be the discussion. But I actually want to open with this, and I forgot, so let's talk about this now. Speaking about alcohol, today I'm in Düsseldorf. Today is the 11th of November. So traditionally, this is a huge, it's not a holiday, but everybody takes it off pretty much. It's a party. You know, we have Carnival in the Rhineland, and on the 11th of the 11th at 11 o'clock is when it starts. This is when the Carnival season starts, and there's usually huge celebrations, and everybody stops working at 11, starts drinking and having fun. Now, they outlawed Carnival completely this year, which is a bit understandable because the huge outbreak we had earlier in the year, in March or at the beginning of April, was Carnival related. That was also in North Rhine-Westphalia. This was in Heinsberg. That's where the Heinsberg study comes from. And so it's a bit understandable in that respect. Obviously, that was the end of the Carnival season of last year. But yeah, but the thing that is so interesting is that they outlawed in Düsseldorf today the sale of alcohol anywhere. Not only, I'm getting... Sale of alcohol obviously aggravates me, so I'm moving my hands. But they outlawed the sale of alcohol in the whole city. Shops, supermarkets, nobody can sell alcohol today, which is completely and utterly unprecedented. This has never happened in Germany, and it's pretty rare that stuff like that happens around the world as well, right? So obviously the prohibition, and then there's countries like Saudi Arabia, and now Düsseldorf is in line. But we're gonna talk about this. That's in this law as well. So we're gonna talk about this as well. Now, there's some interesting things about this law. So they're changing, for example, language in the actual law in the IFSG that exists. One of the words that is changed several times, which I found very, very interesting and explains a lot about what they're doing here, is so they're talking about certain measures and when they should be enacted in the law. And as the law is right now, it always talks about schwerwiegende Lage. So something, you know, schwerwiegende something. Schwerwiegend means, oh God, no, I think I need to be precise. So let me pull up a translation website here. Schwerwiegend. So schwerwiegend means serious. And they're changing this to bedrohlich. And bedrohlich means menacing. Now, it's actually not that clear in English, I realize now that I translated it. But in German, there's a marked difference between these two words. And the first one, the serious, is so that's how serious is the situation is usually based on empirical information. At least schwerwiegend, the way it's used in German, always implies that it's quantifiable. I mean, you have to have a scale and you have to make up the scale, but something is more schwerwiegend than something else. And there's usually, that's quantifiable, right? There's more people dead, there's more property destroyed, something like that. Now, bedrohlich, menacing, is usually not connected to empirical data. Bedrohlich itself is a very emotional word. That's an emotional word. So they're changing in a context in the law that they will use to justify measures, where they will say, okay, the situation is this bad. They're changing from a word that implies empirical evidence to emotions. Right? Bedrohlich is always how serious do I think something is? It doesn't necessarily have, it's a word you use with things like monsters, for example. You know, a monster in German is bedrohlich. It is something, maybe it doesn't even exist, right? It's like a bogeyman, right? It doesn't even have to exist, but you know, there is a certain, there's an expectation and emotion that is involved there. And I find this in a law. I mean, we're not talking about like editing a novel here, right? We're talking about the law. And I find this extremely serious because they're specifically changing words from important words that need an empirical basis to something that's emotional. And that's I find this to be a good explanation for what's going on generally. That's something I think as well. I think our general response to this health crisis, which it is, you know, I'm not saying it's not, but our response to that is less based on empirical data and more on emotions. How dangerous do we think it is, right? Do we think masks work? That is based more on a gut feeling and on circumstantial evidence than on actual facts, because it's just hard to prove. It's just in reality, it's too. The world isn't black and white. You know, there's no tests you can run. Well, you could, but there would be immoral, right? You could put an infected person and a healthy person in a room, and you know, in one test you let the healthy person wear a mask, and the other one you don't, right? But you can't run tests like that, obviously. So that's something I found very, very, very worrying. Another thing I find worrying is that people say that this law is lots of it. All these travel restrictions only affect sick people. The problem is the wording in this law specifically says sick people who are suspected to be sick. That's actually what the IFSG says already, but they're putting a third thing in. People are suspected to be how do I say this? Infectious, I guess. So that divorces it from somebody actually having symptoms to you just suspecting somebody could infect somebody else or could be infected by somebody else. And that's everybody. I mean, right. If you say these restrictions are for sick people, which is what the IFSG currently says, because it is tailored for quarantines, not lockdowns, right? The current German law for this, which was last changed in 2001, I think, or 2000 even, deals mostly with sick people. You know, the ability of the government to take certain civil rights from you if you're sick, right? If you have Ebola or the plague, which is actually what this law was made for, it says, well, if you won't isolate, we can put you in a hospital or in a ward. You know, we can put you in there and isolate you, force isolate you. Now, sure, that's about sick people. And, people you haven't tested yet, so that are suspected to be sick. But people you suspect to be infectious is something completely different, because, now you're divorcing it even from symptoms. You're saying, okay, this person was so we know this one person was infected, and there's all these other people who were in proximity, and they might be infected, or they might be at the risk of being infected or infecting somebody else or something like that. And you can apply these restrictions, which are literally, we can take them and put them somewhere and lock them up, to these people. And they changed that throughout the whole law where this kind of stuff applies. So basically it applies to everybody. Also, people who defend this law, especially the politicians, it will be debated tomorrow. So on Thursday, the 12th, it will be debated publicly in the Bundestag. It currently resides with the health, they have these subgroups in parliament, they're with the health people. But they are all these people, the health people, they're not doctors, they're just politicians that are in a certain interest group, right, where they decide health laws and stuff. None of these people are medical doctors. They have people that advisors that are medical doctors, but none of them are medical doctors, biologists, or anybody else. They're lawyers mostly. Lawyers, some of them are, kindergarten teachers or stuff like that. It resides with them, and tomorrow there will be a general discussion of this law. So the problem here is, what I wanted to say, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Why didn't I just drink a bit of beer and it would have come back to me? So I'm going to do that now. So what these people say when they defend it is like, this is just temporary. And actually the measures they had, the policy that I talked before, which was basically all of this just in policy, that was all limited until the 31st of March. Which is why they can't extend that. So they have to put this into law now. So after the 31st of March, which, everybody assumes, me including, that this still will be still going on, they can still do this. And everybody says it's limited, and they're putting a whole new article in this law, which has all these mask measures and all this in there, and lockdown stuff. And that's specifically mentions SARS-CoV-2. And they say this is only specific for this virus, and afterwards we will stop using it and whatever. Now, I would like you to think about the following thing. Several things. First of all, we know very little about this virus, which I personally find alarming. We've had since February. I think parts of the scientific community have been aware of this at least since February, if not even January. So we've had 10 months, and everybody's concentrating on this. Any scientist I know who does anything in the field is at least half, or has at least their name on some paper. Everybody's concentrating on this. There's lots of money going into this, and we still don't really know how it spreads. Right? We now know it spreads via aerosols, but also via bigger droplets. We don't know. So we don't know how much this mutates. So what could happen? What is still likely, I think, or it's possible, is that we will figure out next year that this is like influenza. So that we'll get 6 strains of this thing, and we'll get a new strain every year, and you can do a vaccine, but it'll only protect you for a year. So if that happens, that thing's never going. SARS-CoV-2 is never going to go away. It will never be solved. If that happens, it's going to be like influenza. It's going to be with us for the next 60, 70 years. So we have to assume, I think, if we look at this law, we have to assume, and similar laws in other countries, we have to assume that that's the case and that will happen. There's also some other things we have to assume. As a political commentator pointed out, I can't really remember who it was, otherwise I would give them credit. But as they pointed out, we make laws with the assumption not that these laws are for the current government, which we assume is, I would even say, I don't like him. I don't like big, large coalitions in Germany, and with the two big parties, I always thought that's a problem. But no matter if I like the government or not, I would say it's democratically minded and respects the constitution generally. But we have to make laws with other governments in mind. And with everybody saying, with everybody talking about Trump, you have to assume that the next government is going to be run by the German Trump, right? So you have to make laws that are watertight and that are that will not bite us in the ass if we ever get a government that is less democratically minded. And I don't think this law applies. One of the reasons is if you look at the law itself, there are 7 instances of them saying that the government can do something, enact measures, change rules, do things, without having to consult the Bundesrat. And to give you a quick understanding of, so I've talked about this before on the show, but you might be new, might be the first episode you listen to. Germany is a federal republic. It's called the Federal Republic of Germany. It's a republic made out of federal states. And when it was founded, it was specifically designed that way, and we specifically have 2 chambers of parliament, one could say. We have the actual parliament, the Bundestag. They're elected by the people. And then we have a second house, which, if you look at it from a bird's eye view, is a bit about like its mission is a bit like the House of Lords in the UK. It is, although it is. I mean, they're representative of the people. They're just not elected directly. So what happens is, if we have a federal election where we elect the government and the chancellor, who runs the government, and then we have local elections. We have local parliaments in every federal state. And these parliaments will send every federal state, depending on their size, has a certain amount of seats. A bit like the Electoral College in the US, although that votes, they have a different amount of seats. And they send people to the Bundesrat, which is, the kind of like the upper house of parliament. And they are consulted on certain laws. They are consulted on everything that affects the constitution. So on this law, because I'm going to talk about how that works in a bit, because it affects the constitution, they have to be consulted. And they're generally consulted on everything that affects as we say, Länder, the federal states. Now, the interesting thing is that this law actually says, the government can do things without consulting the Bundesrat. Now, what is amazing about this is that if you talk to politicians or if you read or listen to what politicians say that drafted this law, is that this law concerns the states, because health policy in Germany is set by the federal states. And the way the current policies worked was that Merkel did a video call with all the heads of the federal states and got them to agree on certain measures, but they had to implement all these measures locally in their federal states. And that's usually not done. Usually the federal government doesn't set the agenda for certain things like healthcare, like schools, education. And this all this system sounds really complicated, but it has a simple reason. After World War II, when, political scientists and politicians sat together and they said, how are we going to draft a constitution for this country? How are we going to create Germany as a nation state, as a democratic system that will survive another, that will resist another Nazi uprising, another Hitler, basically. One of the explicit reasons they set it up like this was that they didn't want power to be concentrated too much in the government. And the Nazis, they centralized everything. So, they centralized everything basically under the rule of Prussia, right? They were sitting in Berlin, and Germany was always, not under the Weimar Republic. It wasn't that federal, but it was basically all the old kingdoms were all states, right? And that's it's not completely correct, but that's basically what our current federal models, right? The Bavaria still exists, Lower Saxony. It's all these different parts of Germany that maybe have different ideas of how things work. But the general idea is that the government doesn't have too much influence, and for example, can't influence education. That's why education is in there, because the Nazis they had a way to run the country, a totalitarian government, where one of the definitions of being totalitarian means you affect everything, and you affect the education. You train the children. It's literally what they did. The Nazis trained the children in school to revere the Führer, the head of state, and to accept certain, basically brainwash them. And you don't want that to happen again. And that's why we have the system. And the problem is that the defenders, or the guys who made this law, they say this law affects the states, the federal states. If that is the case, why do they go on and on about in these changes to this existing law that the government can do all these things without consulting the duly elected representatives of the federal states? I don't understand this. And there's other evidence of this. I mean, there is, for example, they collect all this data under the Robert Koch Institute. And usually data collection in Germany doesn't work like this. I mean, we have ID cards, right? If I'm in Germany, if I move, I moved from Hamburg to Düsseldorf. Hamburg's a federal state, Düsseldorf is in North Rhine-Westphalia. Now, if I do that, I have to, when I move into my new flat, within 2 weeks, I have to go to the government office and tell them where I live, and then I moved. And so that data is collected by the local city authority in Düsseldorf and is kept there. And the federal state government can access that data directly, but the federal government can't. So that's why they have they did, like for a long time they didn't, but a few years ago they did, and they want to do censuses in Germany. There's always the federal government tries to get information they legally can't get. So the federal government can't go and say, okay, this Fabian Scherschel, where does he live? I mean, they can do that in certain cases if a judge says, there are rules, but generally they can't do that. Generally, only my local government officials are supposed to know that. For example, if we have an election, they need to send me my voting papers, right? So we have and patient data is the same way. So our health offices are specifically very local. There's a city health authority, there's one for the federal state, and there really isn't a federal one. I mean, there is a ministry for health, but they don't keep patient data, right? They do legislation and all this kind of stuff. And so the Robert Koch Institute, them collecting this data, was originally already unprecedented. That's really something that didn't happen, but they say, okay, it's Infektionsschutzgesetz, it's important, the nation is in danger, then they can do that. And, this has been around for decades. That's okay. But now they're collecting this data, and one of the interesting things is, for example, we have data protection officers in every federal state, and we have a federal data protection officer. Now, this law says the person who is responsible for for this RKI system, for the data collection, to look for the adherence of this system to our data protection laws, is the federal data protection officer. And they do that because otherwise I'm living in North Rhine-Westphalia, right? Let's say they collect my data because I didn't do a COVID test. And let's say I have issues. For example, I don't like that this data is collected centralized or whatever, or by the RKI, or how long it's being stored. and I have issues, and I say, well, this is not in compliance with the GDPR or like local laws, then I can go to the local, the North Rhine-Westphalia data protection officer, but I can't do that with this. This is explicitly only the federal data protection officer, which just, makes it easier for them. They only have to convince one person that everything's all right. And we have quite big differences with this. For example, when, just to take a random example from the epidemic, when Apple started taking temperature of people getting into their stores, a local data protection officer, I think in Hesse, said this is unconstitutional. And they were, in Berlin, they had no problem with that. The Berlin data protection officer for the federal state of Berlin was completely okay with it. So there are differences, and I think they want to make it easier or easier for them, harder for people to complain against this. Now, why I mean, you listen to this, you can tell I'm outraged. And why am I outraged? So this law, because, that's how things work in Germany. So there's the text of the law, and then there is their, I can't remember the simplest German words that I have to look up now. What word am I looking for? Well, their reasoning, basically, basically their rationale for this law, and they explain a lot of things. And one of the things they have to explain with us is obviously, which they're obviously impinging on constitutional rights of people, and they have to enumerate which constitutional rights there are. And as far as I can tell, actually, I missed one here that I have to put in here now, so I don't. Did I put that? No, it's not. Religionsfreiheit. I'm just writing this down in my notes, so I have it later for the show notes, so you can read it. So, as far as I can tell, this law impinges on 6 major constitutional rights. And these are basically our version of human rights in Germany. So there is what we call the Recht auf körperliche Unversehrtheit. So my right to decide what people do with my body. So this is like, this is why, I've talked about this with vaccines. This is why I don't think you can force vaccinate people in Germany, because giving somebody an injection is considered harmful. Like what would you? God, I'm just Googling words today. I don't know what it is. It's just today. It's Körperverletzung. That's a very German word. Körperverletzung. It's a legal term, so I want to get it right. This is why I'm looking these things up. Assault. So that would class as assault, right? If a doctor gave you an injection against your will, that would be classed as assault because of this constitutional right. That's where it goes back to. Then there's the right of the freedom of the person. So, basically Magna Carta kind of stuff. You can't lock somebody up without due process, without, a judge being involved. There's the Versammlungsfreiheit, which is the right to congregate and especially protest for political reasons. The Recht auf Freizügigkeit, which is weird even in German, it means that you're allowed to go wherever you want. The state can't just say, well, you can't leave this federal state. As a German citizen, I'm generally allowed to go anywhere I want. Pretty much any way I want, unless these are always bordered. These civil rights are find their restrictions within if I do something harmful to somebody else, then these might not apply in that situation. But generally I have that right. Then there is the right Recht auf Unverletzlichkeit der Wohnung, which means nobody's allowed. I've talked about this specifically last episode and also before. The police is not allowed to go into my the place where I live. without a warrant. They can't look into the windows if I, forcibly. I mean, if I have the windows open, they can look in. But if I close my windows and put the blinds up, they're not allowed to, I don't know, smash the window in and look through the blinds or whatever. And I don't. If they're at the door, they're not. And I'm there, and they're like, "Hello, can we come in?" And I'm like, "No, do you have a warrant?" They can't. They're not allowed to look around me and try to figure out if there's people in there. And they need to change that, obviously, because if they want to check if I have an illegal party, which is very dangerous these days.
Illegal party detected. You're having fun, citizen. Stop immediately.
If they want to do that, then they need to get into my home, which they're not allowed to. They're not, This is also the law, by the way, that explains why they're not allowed to tap my phone, or this is the same right, or put malware on my computer. So if we impinge on that, we impinge on all that. And freedom of religion. That's the last one I put in. I don't think they actually mentioned that. That's why I didn't put it in. They didn't mention that in their rationale, but it's definitely in there because they're explicitly saying they're restricting religious gatherings. So let's look into this law. Let's see what we have here, what they are doing. So as I said, they are creating a first of all, the Robert Koch Institute creates a list of risk areas, so other countries that they deem risky, and that will be interesting later. Generally, they collect a lot of data. I mean, they already collect data about tests, if you're infected. But they will now also just generally collect more data. They will also collect data on the vaccine. So they say it's pseudonymized. So basically what they collect is a pseudonym for you, when you're born, your gender, and your zip code, and then basically in what district your doctor is, what the doctor, what kind of doctor is it? Is it a GP? Is it a what specialization the doctor specializes in? Then the date of the vaccine, what kind of vaccine you've got. So there's a special code for that kind of stuff, and all this stuff. Now that's pseudonymized, but my issue with this is, and I don't think generally, as the audience to this podcast and generally privacy interested people, I don't really need to get into why, if you have this is all in one database, right? If they have a database about your positive tests and all this kind of stuff and your travels, why? I mean, I can't see how this pseudonymization is gonna hold up if anybody wants to do any big data analysis and AI shenanigans, cyber. So I would be interested in any of the members of parliament who basically drafted this law to explain how they are gonna pseudonymize this efficiently. It's all gonna be stored at the Robert Koch Institute. Get a little money for that, and now they're doing that. I already told you that only the Federal Data Protection Officer can be appealed to if you have any issues with that. Interestingly, the federal government will decide how long this data is stored, and that is in the laws tells me it supersedes the GDPR, because in the GDPR there are explicit exclusions for pandemics or epidemics, and so it I feel like this fall in Germany, so this then would fall back to the Infektionsschutzgesetz, and here the government can just decide, and it doesn't say how long, or there's a maximum. They can, if they want to keep that data forever, they apparently can. yeah, and then they say, they're going to delete some data to keep it pseudonymized, but it's not technical enough for me to be convinced that this is going to work. Of course, they just want more data. Just generally, they're decentralizing everything. They're putting the right in there for the RKI to just basically seize any test samples anybody has in hospitals or labs or whatever. I guess if they want to do analysis, like if there's if you're doing research and in a hospital and you find a new mutation of that virus and you don't want to tell anybody because you're publishing that data or whatever, then the RKI can just seize your samples. Which is interesting. And then we come to section 28A, which is the big one they put in for SARS-CoV-2, where all the interesting stuff is in here. And let's see what they actually have, what's actually in there. So we have limits on gatherings and the ability of people to leave their domicile in private and public spaces. Now, public spaces, okay, yes, they can generally do that, but they can do that for lots of other reasons. The private thing is new, and that I think is, I personally think is unconstitutional. It certainly clashes with the Constitution. They can order social distancing in public places, which is something we didn't even know about. Physical distancing, I would call it. Something we didn't even know about as early as 2019. They're putting in the ability to order the general populace to wear masks. It's not specified when and where, so they can decide that. They specify that they can tell people not to go somewhere in certain in certain places, culture things, or generally. This mentions culture and entertainment, so it's, stuff you do in your free time. They can close or limit sporting events. They can close any kind of social gathering spaces. They can restrict or completely forbid overnight stays. And then, all these kind of, shops, big shops, small shops, local shops, they can close all of that. They can close or not allow any events taking place, any big events. All the stuff we have already is just putting that into law. It specifically says social gatherings can be forbidden and religious gatherings, which I would think is unconstitutional, but they don't ask me. And then 12.12 is very interesting. They can forbid the sale of alcohol. That's the thing I was talking about. And the ability for you to drink alcohol in public places. I find this to me is egregious. First of all, I like alcohol, but I find this problematic because it's like one of, you ask people who say this is a good idea, right? I do that, and I'm like, why are they doing this? Does alcohol facilitate the spread of this virus? And then they say, yes, for sure. Just look at what happened with Carnival. People drink and they get completely out of control and then they spread the virus. And I'm like, do you have any evidence for this? Is there any, not even scientific, is there any good, is there any data on this? Is there any evidence? People are not very social, not only very social and close to each other and kissing each other when they're drunk, right? Just people do that. Everybody knows that. It's obvious. And I'm like, this is a law. Since when is it okay to be in parliament and justify a law? That in the justification for this, they're just like, they're acting like everybody knows. Like, you know, your mother told you when people drink, then they get close together and they spread the virus. That's not how you draft laws, right? That's like I have a problem with that with the mask wearing, where I don't see scientific evidence that really supports that. But then I think, in that case, I'm like, okay, yes, it probably has a beneficial effect and it doesn't hurt anybody really. So, why not do that? It's hard to. I understand medical experiments, and biological science, and I understand how hard you can't really quantify like virus particles. Doesn't really work. It's not like you have a petri dish and you can sneeze on that and you can sneeze on it with a mask on and without, and then you see the bacteria grow and then you can quantify. You can't do that with viruses. It's just not the way. The quantitative PCR is very good at, you have a sample and it tells you exactly how much DNA or RNA was in that sample. That's okay, but the problem is the sample is just the sample. It's not the whole area, right? It's not like a petri dish. It's just that one sample, right? And if you take it from a person, that's why these tests vary widely, because we know that depending on where you take it in the nose, you can get very different results, for example. Depending on the person, depending on the way their nose is, I don't know, depending on the person who takes the way in which they take the sample. So you can't quantify that. And I was like, okay, let's do this. But now they're starting with like, oh yeah, alcohol is obviously the problem. Let's just forbid alcohol. I can tell you why they're doing that. It's very easy. What they want to do is outlaw fun. They don't want people to get together and have fun. But they can't do that. You can't outlaw fun. So they have to do this. And I just find it abhorrent for a state to do this kind of stuff. I mean, there's the same reason why I think prohibition was a bad idea, or why I'm all for the legalization of, I can't say the word, of all kinds of drugs, because I think forbidding it doesn't have an effect. It drives people underground. It's idiotic. It doesn't work. And this is supposed to be progressive. This shit. It's not. It's not progressive. It's the opposite. It's like a totalitarian idea of a state who thinks it needs to regulate the private life of its citizens, which is not. If you don't want a totalitarian state, this is not what you want. The state has to keep out of the private lives of its citizens. States who don't do that, who are interested in the private lives of their citizens, tend to be dictatorships or other authoritarian regimes. The Nazis did this. The socialists in Russia, the communists did this. All kinds of religious, states do this. The Chinese do this. This is why they're autocrat. We don't want this. This is not good in a democracy. Anyway, so they're doing that. Then, of course, they can close restaurants. Yes, of course. And they're legalizing the collection of data, of course, in restaurants and everywhere, to curb these super spreading clusters. By the way, this is also data the RKI is collecting. This is all going to go in that database. I'm personally thinking, I'm looking at the Corona One app again. They're building new features in this. I think the government wants to connect this, put that in that app so they know where you are and if you're in restaurants or whatever. They actually, the Corona One app people, I might talk about this in some episode later on. They're actually working on a way to try to do this privacy respecting, like they did all the other stuff. But the government will just do their own app, I guess, if they want to. Now, then they say, when are these measures going to be enacted? And here they have this special this factor we know about. We've heard about this when we were traveling in the subway recently. When they tell us this.
Liebe Fahrgäste, aktuell überschreitet Düsseldorf den Schwellenwert bei der Verbreitung des Coronavirus. Auf 100.000 Einwohner kommen in einer Woche mehr als 50 Neuinfektionen. Helfen Sie mit, diesen Wert zu senken. Tragen Sie in unseren Bussen und Bahnen, an unseren Haltestellen und in U-Bahnhöfen unbedingt einen Mund-Nasen-Schutz. Halten Sie ausreichend Abstand und husten oder niesen Sie bitte in die Armbeuge. Bleiben Sie gesund. Ihre Rheinbahn. Dear passengers, Düsseldorf currently exceeds the threshold level for spreading the coronavirus. There have been more than 50 new infections per 100,000 residents in 1 week. Please help to reduce this level of infection. Ensure you wear a full face mask in our buses and trains, at stops and in underground stations. Keep your distance and make sure to cough or sneeze into the crook of your arm. Stay healthy. Your Rheinbahn.
So the threshold level, that's the thing we're talking about, the threshold, that is, it's new infections normalized over the last 7 days per 100,000 inhabitants. And the highest I'm reading German, the highest threshold amount, which they also say in this PSA that Düsseldorf has exceeded, is 50 new infections in the last 7 days per 100,000 inhabitants. And they use this so they can say, okay, when that happens, we can enact these measures. And then, if it's only 35, then it's not, milder measures. But the interesting thing is that they say that this applies to cities, basically cities, then like districts of cities, counties, federal states, or the whole country. And they can just pick and choose. So if any of these, anybody exceeds that, then they can put the measures in there. So I say if you're living in some rural area in Bavaria, but where there's no cases, but Germany by itself exceeds this, then they can put these restrictions in. So it looks to me like they're leaving themselves maximum leeway. In the, admittedly they have a guidance system, but within that guidance system, they're trying to leave themselves maximum leeway. And of course, they can do these measures. Some of these measures, or all of them, they can pick and choose. Now, a new thing is that what's already in effect is that people traveling to Germany or intending travel to Germany must now fill out a form where when they get into Germany, they have to quarantine themselves for 10 days, and they have to fill out this form and explain where they were in those 10 days, where they stayed and all of this. And that's one part. But the other part is that this law requires all public transport, and airlines, public transport, and I think harbor offices to collect data from people traveling, and this is inside Germany as well. And they can with the traveling inside of Germany, and at the point where you want to travel to Germany or you arrive there, you have to fill out this information, and that goes to the RKI. But if you're traveling inside of Germany, then the police